Welcome back to Where Do We Go From Here with Scott Catello. Over the next several episodes, I will be relaunching what I called the Workplace Design Series Reframed for 2026. At a moment when the return to office narrative has receded and a new question stands before every executive, portfolio manager, and design leader. And that is, what purpose does the office now serve? Now, if you followed my earlier series a few years ago, you'll remember I discussed the future office, the evolution of the office, and how design was adapting to a rapidly changing world. Well, as we move deeper into 2026, we've entered a new phase, one that's less about returning and far more about reinventing. As I see it, the return to the office story can now really be considered over. The new question, as I see it, isn't when will people come back, it's why should they come back. In this first episode, The State of the Office 2026, From Return to Reinvention, I'll look back at what the return to office era taught us from 2024 through 2025. We'll then move forward to the reinvention phase, how leading firms are redefining purpose, rethinking measurement, and repositioning their portfolios using AI-powered analytics and design. Let's be honest, for all intents and purposes, the return to office story is over. The next chapter is reinvention, designing for purpose, not presence. And as designers, we stand at a pivotal moment. It's no longer will employees return? The real question now is what purpose does the office serve in your strategy, culture, and future? So join me in this episode, The State of the Office 2026, From Return to Reinvention, and I'll explore what's happened since the hybrid transition of 2025 and how the national office market has stabilized or fractured, and what the data tells me about the year ahead. And you'll want to stay tuned to the end as I will be giving some of my crystal ball predictions for 2026 for the office and workplace market. So let's begin by turning the lens back to 2025 so we can clearly see what foundations we build upon. When we talk about the return of the office, I feel it's important to remember that it isn't just a story about buildings. It's also a continuing story about people, behavior, and adaptation. By late 2024, hybrid work wasn't a novelty anymore. It had become the default operating model for really most organizations. According to CBRE's Global Workplace and Occupancy Insights, 92% of corporate clients had adopted some version of hybrid work. And looking at Gallup data from 2025 found 51% of remote capable employees were hybrid, 28% were fully remote, and only 21% were back in the office full time. Yet despite the headlines, foot traffic was gradually rising. Aurora's national tracking in mid 2025 showed office visits up over 10% year over year, closing the gap with pre pandemic baselines to just under 22%. The energy was starting to shift, but the strategy still felt eerily unclear. Given my experience and research for this market, I saw many firms use 2025 as a bit of a testing ground. And given that understanding, I see some possible philosophies emerging in 2025. First, firms and companies made decisions during the last year, with many companies, especially in finance, law, and consulting, mandating stricter in office days. They viewed physical presence as essential for collaboration, mentoring, and performance. Secondly, innovation driven sectors like AI, biotech, and creative media began experimenting with the office as what I call a cultural anchor rather than a daily requirement. They saw value in designing spaces people wanted to be in, not ones they had to be in. Other companies chose to downsize, reducing footprint by 15 to 30% as hybrid settled in. Converting surplus floors to creative labs, shared hubs, or leasing them to co working operators. Some firms held off on long term leases, preferring shorter term flexibility and right sizing clauses tied to utilization metrics. But 2025 also revealed many cracks. Many companies underestimated what's now being called return to office fatigue. By mid 2025, organizations enforcing rigid attendance saw measurable drops in morale and retention. HR data showed disengagement up by 10 to 15% in those particular environments. Employees described burnout from long commutes, fragmented routines, and a loss of autonomy. Quiet quitting, or employees doing only essential tasks, and quiet cracking, considered burnout under hybrid stress, emerged as real productivity and morale risks for companies. Though precise metrics are harder to pin down, multiple organizations, per HR reports, reported increases in disengagement and voluntary attrition rates by 10 to 15% during the 2024 to 2025 in firms with rigid return policies. By late 2025, the workplace had entered what many are calling the hybrid realignment phase, a period marked by both stabilization and selective volatility across many industries. The earlier wave of return to office fatigue stemmed largely from a fundamental mismatch. Organizations expected a full or near full return, while employees had already adapted to autonomy, reduced commutes, and flexible daily routines. This disconnect produced inconsistent office utilization, with floors bustling early in the week and sitting relatively empty by Thursday, ultimately weakening the traditional business case for large scale, permanent office footprints. As companies recalibrated expectations, patterns began to stabilize, but the balance between flexibility and presence remained an ongoing negotiation rather than a solved equation. So, what were the lessons learned from this hybrid alignment phase? Well, to start, I think many employers mandating presence didn't really equate presence to productivity. And perhaps we learned that design, at its heart, is the experience of space, which now matters perhaps more than ever. Many firms may have underestimated the return fatigue. Mid 2024 to late 2025, sustaining strict mandates led to resignation surges, especially among working parents, and creating difficulty for companies to retain talent. Now, I am the belief that when offices are uninspired or unaligned with purpose and corporate mission, employees will tend to disengage. Workplaces are intentional when they offer connection, innovation, and well being, then people do choose to be to work. The final data point from 2025, I believe, tells much of the story. While national vacancy rates hovered around 20%, utilization rates in well designed, well purpose driven offices were often double the market rate average. In this case, design was truly a differentiator. By the end of 2025, the office market was not collapsing or really fully rebounding. It was rebalancing, with industries taking different, diverging paths to redefining their workplace strategies. On one hand, sectors such as tech, AI, biotech, media, and other creative fields began reinvesting in physical space as a cultural innovation anchor. These companies viewed their offices not as overhead, but as talent magnets, leasing an estimated 5 to 10 million square feet across major U.S. tech corridors between late 24 and 25, according to the Wall Street Journal. Their new spaces emphasize wellness zones, immersive collaboration hubs, and prototyping labs. Environments designed to amplify identity, creativity, most importantly, cross pollination. The trade off, however, came in higher capital costs and pressure to demonstrate a clear ROI per square foot. Meanwhile, other sectors, notably finance, insurance, and admin services, and parts of professional consulting, doubled down on distributed and hybrid models, diverting investment toward digital infrastructure rather than their own real estate. These remote first strategies delivered flexibility, reduced fixed costs, and widened talent reach, but often at the expense of cultural cohesion and creative collaboration. And the result? Well, a divided but adaptive office landscape, one where reinvention, not uniformity, defines success. The result is the diverged market I expect in 2026, seeing the corporate office as both a competitive asset and a cost center, depending on the organization's business purpose, maturity, and mission. The takeaway? Well, perhaps the great return has officially ended, and in its place is the beginning of a reinvention. The word that will define 2026 as I see it is reinvention. I'm seeing the national office market stabilize, but I'll preface by saying unevenly. Sectors that are tied to innovation like AI, life science, and healthcare are driving demand again. CBRE's latest 2025 leasing data showed that tech firms leading absorption for the first time in 3 years, adding nearly 10 million square feet of new office commitments. Meanwhile, administrative heavy industries continue to shed or consolidate, redirecting their capital into digital tools and distributed networks. But beyond footprint, what's truly driving change is how corporate decisions are made. For decades, portfolio strategies were given guided cost per square foot statistics. However, in today's technological world, we're seeing the rise of AI driven forecasting tools that analyze utilization data, meeting frequencies, sensor readings, collaboration metrics, and even employee sentiment. These systems can now simulate what I refer to as what if scenarios, such as what if we cut one floor? What if we relocated to a different neighborhood? What if we shifted to 4-day presence schedules? AI tools can model how those different decisions affect not just cost, but culture, innovation, velocity, and retention. That's quite a profound shift. The big question for 2026, however, is will companies leverage these tools to assist them in making calculated decisions? The real estate industry and the design and architecture industry behind the reinvention of the office is readily becoming data informed all in real time. And with that, so too does changing the conversation with leadership. Now, instead of asking, how many desks do we need? Executives will and should be asking, what behaviors do we want to see? And what spatial conditions can support them? In 2026, I see leading firms shifting from a cost per square foot to what I call impact per square foot, measuring how much value, culture, retention, collaboration, and well being each net usable foot delivers. So, what does this all mean? Well, a company might discover that a redesigned collaboration hub drives a 15% increase in cross team projects, or that an upgraded wellness zone correlates with a 20% drop in voluntary attrition. Suddenly, the office isn't a fixed cost exercise anymore. Instead, it becomes an instrument for talent performance, innovation, and well being. Companies are no longer sizing offices based on historical headcounts, but on how teams actually work, a concept known as right sizing. This approach frees capital from underutilized areas while enabling more intentional investment in spaces that drive performance. At the same time, purpose based design is redefining the workplace layout itself. Zones are now crafted around activity and intent, from maker zones for hands on collaboration to focused sanctuaries for deep work, emergent collaboration pods for ad hoc creativity, and digital immersion studios for hybrid engagement. For organizations managing multi city portfolios, this translates into a layered strategy. Flagship experiential hubs in major cities like New York, mid-size hybrid nodes in regional markets, and flexible co-working partnerships in satellite areas. Emerging trends such as embedded microhubs closer to where the talent lives and shared amenity platforms across multiple buildings are further optimizing flexibility and culture. Ultimately, the impact per square foot mindset allows executives to evaluate their real estate not by occupancy, but by outcomes, measuring how effectively space supports culture, innovation, and long term retention. I again expect to also see the rise of purpose based design, tailoring each location in a multi city footprint to what it does best. To me, purpose based design means segments of the office are intentionally differentiated. Maker zones, emergent collaboration pods, focus sanctuaries, digital immersion studios. In this direction, your downtown flagship becomes a client experience hub, and your regional offices act as hybrid nodes for local collaboration. And you leverage co working or on demand hubs for remote talent. Now, this is right sizing, not shrinking, but rebalancing of your company. For those of you who listened to my thoughts on the future of the office space in late 2023 may recall that I discussed this as an important symbiotic relationship with the idea that the new corporate workplace should act as an ecosystem for your company. I certainly see this trend continuing in 2026. In 2026, I expect more executives could and should possibly be elevating their office portfolios partly on the following questions. First, where do we need to be physical? Second, where can we be virtual? And three, how can technology bridge those two environments I mentioned seamlessly? Now, some thoughts from the architect's perspective. What's happening now feels less like an evolution and more like a paradigm reset. The office is no longer a static object. It will be thought of as a dynamic tool, a living reflection of a company's culture and purpose. In 2026, I believe the office and workplace will shift from designing space for occupancy to designing for company outcome. This can be looked and potentially achieved by looking at this a couple ways. Let's start with flexibility as being a driver. The most forward thinking workplaces we're designing right now are being built around fluid occupancy. Modular walls, mobile power systems, and plug and play zoning. Raised floor systems mean that teams can expand or contract. That supports 60% collaboration at one point might flip to 80% focus work on a different week, all through movable partitions and smart infrastructure. This flexibility doesn't just optimize space, it signals agility, which is the cultural currency of the modern enterprise and office. Second, let's look at zoning and departmentalization by purpose rather than department. Instead of an accounting wing or a marketing corner, we may design by experience, focus sanctuaries, digital immersion studios, rapid idea zones, and team crossroads. The physical office then becomes a choreograph of energy designed to encourage the right kinds of teaming collisions. And underpinning and driving it all is, well, you probably guessed it, data. We now have real time dashboards that visualize how people move through space, where collaboration happens, where it drops off, what zones are unused. In the new office workplace, you should have the ability to adjust floor plans based on behavioral analytics, the same way you do a website based on user data. And to me, that's where we're headed. And AI is the design partner that can help make it possible. As we move deeper into 2026, the conversation among clients is also maturing. They're not asking, when will everybody come back, but how do we rediscover purpose? The office has become the physical manifestation of identity, as the workplace historically and metaphorically is where strategy meets culture. In other terms, the office should be a three-dimensional expression of a company's values. The current data says that organizations who get this right, who invest in culture and adaptability through design, will outperform peers on innovation, metrics, retention, and engagement. However, let's not kid ourselves. Though I do think industry wise we'll continue to see divergence, but as I said earlier, the market shows that AI, tech, and life sciences firms are expanding physical space again, often in mixed use innovation districts. Legal and financial firms are redesigning smaller hubs optimized for hybrid collaboration. Meanwhile, older downtown towers are being reimagined and readapted and are being converted into labs, co working environments, or even residential hybrids. The corporate office market may no longer be shrinking. It may be simply, well, transforming. And those who adapt early, those who see real estate and the office as a living, breathing, what I call ecosystem, will find themselves maybe, just a maybe, ahead of the curve. As architects, that also means one thing: design has never been more strategic and intentional. The future office isn't defined by square footage, it's defined by impact, adaptability, and human experience. And if 2025 was about return, my prediction for 2026 is that it will again be all about reinvention. From a principal architect's perspective, the workplace in 2026 is no longer a static asset, but a living, dynamic instrument, one that flexes, adapts, and responds to an evolving culture, strategy, and technology. AI and analytics are now central to this evolution. Generative design tools are enabling architects like myself to ingest real time utilization data, adjacency requirements, noise mapping, daylight analysis, and even cultural interaction patterns to propose optimized layouts. With live dashboards, we can now simulate how occupancy shifts affect spatial efficiency and return on investments, a feedback loop that ties architecture directly to business metrics. Design stage ROI modeling is becoming relatively standard, comparing alternate configurations through the lens of impact per square foot rather than traditional cost. The larger narrative has also transformed from returning to the office to rediscovering purpose. Offices today must earn their existence by delivering measurable value in experience, collaboration, and innovation. For business leaders, the central questions are no longer how many employees return, but rather why do we gather? And what unique value does gathering unlock? Metrics, too, are evolving beyond square footage. Architects and executives will now be measuring culture activation, team mobility, wellness outcomes, innovation, and retention deltas. Looking ahead, 2026 will mark a divergence. Net absorption will be accelerated in innovation driven markets as AI and biotech scale their footprints. Adaptive reuse, transforming traditional office stock into labs, creative headquarters, or mixed use hubs. Ultimately, architects and interior designers who can bridge AI driven design business intelligence, and human experience will move beyond the role of service providers and emerge as true strategic partners in shaping the future of work. So, as we close out today's episode, let's recap. In this episode, I hope I was able to trace an arc from the return era to what I think will be this year a reinvention phase. From 2024 through 2025, organizations learned hard lessons about flexibility, fatigue, and the limits of mandates. Now, in 2026, we've entered an age of reinvention, one defined by purpose, analytics, and adaptability. AI and data are now integral to how we design, lease, and measure the workplace. The best companies no longer count people. Instead, they're going to measure impact. The office isn't a space to just fill, it's a platform for culture, innovation, and a company's identity. The office is no longer just a place where people show up, it's a strategic asset, a cultural instrument, and a dynamic ecosystem. As you think about your portfolios, your workforce, and your goals for innovation and retention, the question again is no longer can we return, it's how do we reinvent with purpose? I thank you, the listener, for tuning in to Where Do We Go From Here with me, Scott Catello. If today's episode gave you something new to think about, whether it's how architecture is shaping the future of work or how technology is reshaping what the office even means, I'd love for you to stay connected. Follow or subscribe wherever you're listening so you don't miss the next two episodes in this workplace series where I interview two industry experts from the interior design and real estate fields to get their understanding and predictions for the office and workplace in 2026 and beyond. And if you have thoughts, ideas, or questions about what we discussed today, or a topic you would even like me to explore in a future episode, send me a note directly at catelloscott@gmail.com, as I do personally read every message, and your input often shapes what I will talk about next. If you found value in this conversation, please share the episode with a colleague, a client, or a friend who's navigating these same very questions about the future of the workplace. Every follow, every share, and every email helps this community grow. And that's partly what this show is all about. Until next time, I'm Scott Catello. Thank you for listening. And remember, the future of work isn't something we wait for. It's something that we could design together. Till next time.